¿Me puede editar el aire, por favor? Ya está iniciando. Ah, sí, 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 ya está iniciando. Ah, listo. ¿Qué era? ¿Me puede editar el aire, por favor? Ya está iniciando. Ah, sí, 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 ya está iniciando. Ah, listo. ¿Qué era?
Hola, hola, hola. Hola, sí. Es- Sí. No, ¿la vista de la cámara ahí?
Sí, que vi yo la...
¿Te dejo el control? Sí. ¿Y esto es? Micrófono.
Ah, ya. Sí,
Ah,
esto. Ah,
Pues ahí dice salir, ya,
sí,
es ese.
sí, ya.
No los conocí. Hey.
Yeah, it's quite stable. ¿Arranco yo? ¿O ustedes hacen la introducción primero?
No, primero va a ser, porque va a ser una introducción.
Ah, bueno.
Igual vamos a dar 2 minuticos. Un minuto.
Entonces, ¿y todos tenemos un micrófono o lo vamos pasando?
Lo va a compartir a las conferencias.
Vamos a sentar. You're gonna make a small introduction, then I comment. Me pasó. Ah, qué bueno.
Gracias.
Como quieran. ¿Ya estamos listos? Sí.
¿Ya?
Sí, yo explico antes de que ustedes abran y yo ya presento a los compañeros.
Eso es. Bueno, ya.
Con el teclado.
Sí, no.
Bueno, muy buenas tardes a todos y todas. ¿Me escuchan en la web? Ok, muy bien. Para el CIDER es muy especial poder tener estos resultados de lo que se ha denominado la innovación inclusiva, porque el CIDER pues desde hace bastante ha incluido en los estudios para el desarrollo local y regional el tema de la innovación. Entonces, tanto para los estudiantes de nuestra maestría en planeación urbana y regional, como para las estudiantes de la maestría en estudios interdisciplinarios sobre desarrollo, pero para toda la comunidad universitaria, este es un tema que tiene que ver no solamente desde el punto de vista de la interdisciplinariedad, sino desde el punto de vista de todas las acciones que la sociedad civil y por supuesto el sector privado, corporativo, como la academia, tienen que ver. Entonces, nos da mucho gusto poder contar con David, con Michael y con Raquel en día de hoy y por supuesto con la visita de Diana Morales, nuestra compañera de trabajo en el CIDER hace unos años y que ahora está participando en este proyecto tan importante que ella ya va a presentar. Entonces, les damos la bienvenida y esperemos que pueda ser de mucha utilidad y mucho interés para toda nuestra comunidad. Muchas gracias. Muchas gracias, Diana, por tu venida.
Bueno, buenas tardes. Espero que me estén escuchando bien quienes estén en línea. Gracias. Para mí es un placer estar acá, estar de vuelta. Hace muchos años, como unos 6 años más o menos, me fui del CIDER, estudié la maestría, trabajé también acá y me encanta volver y volverlos a todos y compartir los resultados de esta investigación que estamos haciendo. Ya les voy a contar más de qué se trata y es un proyecto que esperamos se vuelva un proyecto global. Ahora hemos trabajado con algunas ciudades, hemos incluido Medellín, pero queremos seguir pues incluyendo más lugares, así que pues están bienvenidas todas las ideas y todas las sugerencias. Voy a darte, este va a ser un evento bilingüe. Mis intervenciones van a ser en español, las intervenciones de mis compañeros van a ser en inglés, pero si hay alguien que de pronto no siga muy bien en inglés, pues todo va a estar en español traducido acá. Pero si algo no es claro, pues levantan la mano y nos dicen que con gusto lo traducimos. Entonces, acabamos de volver de Medellín. Llegamos a Bogotá entre ayer y antier. Estuvimos haciendo trabajo de campo, estuvimos haciendo entrevistas, observaciones, visitas, caminatas por toda la ciudad. Y fue pues como muy satisfactorio ver, yo no soy de Medellín, mi acento puede sonar paisa, pero yo soy de Armenia, pero Medellín ha estado muy cerca, ¿cierto?, de mi cultura y siempre estaba como en el imaginario de los colombianos con toda su transformación urbana y queríamos entender. Innovación, sí, sigue. Entonces, bueno, fue pues un gran privilegio estar en Medellín y conocer a las personas que han hecho este proceso de transformación y que lo han pensado y que lo han pues llevado a cabo. Hay un montón por hacer, falta mucho trabajo, pero pues sería injusto decir que no ha habido grandes avances también. ¿Qué queremos hoy? Introducir el programa i3o. Como les decía, tenemos la aspiración que se vuelva un programa global e incluir más y más ciudades, así que pues bienvenidas más ideas. Queremos presentar nuestras observaciones iniciales y saber y sobre todo escuchar las reacciones de ustedes. Todos venimos de fuera, de universidades de fuera, trabajamos afuera, entonces sería muy bueno también escuchar de personas que hayan estado pronto más cerca del proceso y más cerca de la ciudad. Y claro, pues conocer sus preguntas y sus comentarios. Vamos a presentar, esperamos que no sea muy largo, unos 25 minutos para tener espacio de discusión. Entonces, pues nada, empezamos.
Thank you. Thank you for all being here. I understand this is a very busy time of your semester, so I appreciate you taking the time this afternoon to be with us today. And I'm looking forward to your questions and comments on the work that we'll be presenting. And as Deanna mentioned, it's preliminary, so it can still change thanks to your contributions. I want to set the scene for you. My name is Michael Glass. I'm a professor of urban sociology at the University of Pittsburgh in Pennsylvania in the United States, originally from New Zealand. This is not an American accent. And I also direct the Urban Studies program, where most of my research is based on regional transformation and infrastructure. And I want to set the scene for you today on the work that we're doing by just mentioning the significance of innovation when it comes to cities and regional transformation. By innovation, I mean those changes that can occur to products or to processes or to organizational structures, often which lead in turn to greater rates of profit and economic competitiveness, just because hopefully through an innovation, you're doing something that is more effective, more profitable for the company or for the organization. As a consequence of how important innovation is for helping economic growth, cities, regions, and countries are demanding innovation and often seek strategies and policies that help their firms and their people become more innovative. Now, within innovation, and innovation as a form of economic development, cities and urban areas are very, very important. And we can get into the specifics of why later on, but for now, let me leave things at a high level by saying that the importance of cities for innovation comes from what could be termed as agglomeration economies, or the effects that occur when people and firms, services, resources are located closely together. And as a result of them being located closely together, we get some special things. We get the reduction of costs. There's less transportation costs, less costs of misunderstandings or communication. And we also get the benefits of encounters like the ones that we're sharing today, of us all being in this room thinking together about a solution. And so cities become very important for innovation and innovation strategies. And now, at this point in time, innovation and cities are coming together globally in what are coined as innovation districts. And let me say something about that. Innovation districts as a policy are now being experimented with across the world. And what I have on this slide, and I'm grateful for the translation that Deanna made, is a few shared characteristics. One of them is that they are frequently anchored by the presence of research universities and by maybe hospitals, research hospitals, and other large knowledge-intensive institutions that can help drive and stimulate innovation. Another key goal of innovation districts is to attract and retain, or to keep, private firms, frequently small and medium-sized, those more innovative, entrepreneurially oriented firms that are striving for innovation as they seek to grow. The other element of innovation districts that I should stress is geographic compactness, a smaller size, in order to maximize those agglomeration effects that I mentioned earlier. Maybe with cafes, maybe with apartments or places to live, maybe with bars or other third spaces, just to help those encounters between people of different firms to try and generate the sort of innovation that is possible. I mentioned that this is a globally present phenomenon, and there is, in fact, a global innovation district network or partnership that exists to try and help cities that might not yet have an infrastructure of innovation to develop that infrastructure. This comes from giid.org, which is that innovation district website. This is their key philosophy for what should occur when it comes to developing innovation districts. It's focused on physical assets. That would be the buildings and the infrastructure, the broadband, the accessibility, the economic assets, which could include incentives for firms, or it could include the access to venture capital or money in which to assist with innovation. And also those networking assets. Maybe a bus rapid transit system, maybe an international airport, maybe a metro system, or maybe those sorts of events to bring people together to try and network. So before I turn over to Rachel, I'll just say that, to David, I should say that one of the things, it's not just physical assets, but it's also human capital, people that make the innovation district function. And the success of it, what can help, or what can the benefit of this can be, is not only increased rates of profit, but according to the proponents of this model of development, it's also sustainability. It's also more attractive places. It's also perhaps a connected community. And what David's about to talk about is this element right here, which is the prospect, perhaps, for some additional equity or social inclusion. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks, Michael. Buenas tardes. Me llamo David Marlowe. I'm from the UK. I'm a professor of practice at the University of Newcastle. Now, Michael talked about innovation as a really important model of development for places actually across the world today. And a lot of this is based on very high value, high knowledge-based activity and people. And one of the struggles that places have had with this model of development is to try and achieve what Michael was saying at the end, which is that it improves inclusion and it provides tangible benefits for poorer, less advantaged communities. And so our interest as a team is particularly in the issues of what we call inclusive innovation. And the reason we are interested, I would say passionate about this, is because particularly, I think in the UK, well, definitely in the UK, which is obviously where I am from, but I suspect also in the developed countries of Europe and the US and Canada and so on, there's a lot of evidence that if you pursue a science, technology, research, and innovation model very single-mindedly, there is a very high risk of actually increasing inequality in the communities where that innovation occurs. Because the benefits often accrue to global companies, research-intensive universities, the very well-paid workers in those universities, and actually sometimes some very ambitious, bright entrepreneurs. But you really need to intervene proactively if you want this model to improve the results for the disadvantaged communities in your cities and regions. And it's for this reason that we have attempted to work with cities that are particularly interested in this to explore how inclusive innovation outcomes can indeed be improved. We've been working for a few months, which I'll with Medellín, which Diana will speak about a little more lately. The name of the program is Improving Inclusive Innovation Outcomes. Just before I get into that, let me be clear about what we mean. What is the definition? What is inclusive innovation? How will you know innovation that is inclusive when you observe it or when you see it, or indeed when you participate in it. And at the start of our program, we did a long literature search of both the policy and the practical types of innovation that are happening, particularly across the UK and US, and what would be the characteristics of strong, inclusive innovation. And we considered that it would have to include one, but ideally all three of the following characteristics. You can term an innovation program or a policy, or indeed a district, an innovation district, inclusive if the type of research and innovation that goes on in it actually impacts positively on the lives of local communities, including the poorer communities around the district. So, for example, if you have an innovation program in a city or an innovation district in a part of the city, is the work that is going on there addressing the problems and the challenges of the poorer people in that community? In Newcastle, for instance, we have a district amongst a community that has very high levels of obesity and diabetes. So for that district to be inclusive, the health innovation going on would probably focus on helping poorer people address diabetes and obesity. So that's one characteristic. A second characteristic is about benefits. An innovation district can be inclusive if the benefits from that district, could be financial, could be business, could be actually community, are actually distributed more widely than without intervention. So normally the benefits accrue almost entirely to the large, richer institutions and individuals. But if actually local people or local businesses or local communities are benefiting directly from the district or from the program, it is more inclusive. And finally, a program or a district is more inclusive if local communities have influence, what we call agency, in shaping the pattern of development that goes on in their community. So ideally, an inclusive innovation district would have all three characteristics, but it must at least have one of those three characteristics. So we got together and we began a program called i3o, Improving Inclusive Innovation Outcomes. And we are trying to collaborate between cities that are interested in this model or these models of inclusive innovation. We have already three, I think actually we have four now cities who are participants. Newcastle in the UK, Pittsburgh in the US, Belfast, which actually is UK but is in Northern Ireland. And we hope that after last week, Medellín also in Colombia. And our focus as a program is to try and understand the culture and context of the cities, to speak to a lot of people in those cities about their pattern of innovation development and how inclusive it is, and then to work with them on dialogue to try and improve the outcomes, the inclusive outcomes from their programs. And we've done this in 3 cities so far, 2 in particular, Newcastle and Pittsburgh, and Rachel's going to speak a little bit about that. Thank you.
Hola, me llamo Rachel Travis, Raquel, Rachel, all fine. Yo soy candidato a doctorado en la Universidad de Pittsburgh y estudio la transferencia de políticas públicas, public policy, entre ciudades. Por favor, discúlpeme por mi horrible gramática español, hoy preservé en inglés. So we did 2 case studies before coming to Medellín. Pittsburgh, where I am based, I present you with a third accent to try to decipher as I'm from the United States, as well as Newcastle in England that David had mentioned. And I'll start off with some similarities between these two cases. Both of these cities have similar histories in that they've struggled with a longstanding period of economic decline and are attempting to reverse that and inject new energy into the local economies and their regions. They're both focusing on STRI, as David mentioned, science, technology, research, and innovation focus to drive that growth. And actually, more specifically, they're both focused in healthcare in order to do that. They've invested in healthcare infrastructure as a means of creating this innovation and creating a sort of renaissance for both of their cities. However, both cities are struggling with a similar issue, which is creating inclusive outcomes from this economic development. And there is a potential to exacerbate some of the existing inequalities that we have. And this is a concern of the various partnerships that are involved in each of the respective cities. So I'll start with Pittsburgh. Pittsburgh, as I said, is focused on healthcare, specifically the development of biotechnologies in cooperation with private corporations as a means of reinvigorating their local economy, as well as private foundations that are very active in the development process. And there's really no real meaningful requirements for these private companies that want to conduct business in Pittsburgh. It's really more focused on what is going to be the direct benefit to the economy rather than what is going to be their inclusion outcomes. And so we see a variety of science and technology research focused corporations coming into Pittsburgh to try to reinvigorate the economy in partnership with the University of Pittsburgh, as well as Carnegie Mellon University, that is sort of settling in the neighborhood of Hazelwood, which is located very close to the neighborhood of Oakland, in which the University of Pittsburgh is located. But we've seen some real issues in terms of connecting the community of Hazelwood to the site where the innovation is occurring, called Hazelwood Green, which is sort of a refurbished brownstone environment, brownfield, thank you. Brownfield that has been renovated into these very impressive steel and glass structures to host these cutting edge corporations in partnership with the foundations and universities. We also see a really strong partnership between some of the regional foundations with the university that are at the core of this innovative plan. And local government does play a role and has been involved in connecting the university to Hazelwood, but this has stalled for a variety of reasons that we can certainly get into later. And so we're waiting to see sort of what these innovative outcomes are going to be in terms of incorporating those benefits for the Hazelwood community. We also see the county involved in a lot of this. So we've got multiple levels of government involved in the inclusive innovation strategy, but it's not clear yet how this is going to impact the broader region. That's certainly on the mind of the various partners involved, but we haven't seen those benefits yet. We've seen the community asking for greater healthcare equity, greater education equity for the residents. And so this is being incorporated into the strategic plan, but we've yet to see the benefits of those. In Newcastle, again, we have a similar focus on healthcare as a means of reinvigorating the economy, although different focuses such as diabetes and obesity. And we see another strong partnership between the university, the local government, and private companies. But the local government we see typically aligning with the university, going along with the plan that they have for what's called the Helix, which is on site in Newcastle. It's strategically located in the community, but in terms of accessibility to the broader population, I think that's a bit of a mixed bag. And one of the key weaknesses that we've seen in terms of Newcastle's strategic vision for inclusive innovation is involvement of the community voice. I think all of the actors would love to see more community involvement, certainly addressing the healthcare inequities that are present, but there hasn't been a strong investment in this effort yet. So there's potential for expansion of this project if all goes well. But again, with both Pittsburgh and Newcastle, we're waiting to sort of see what inclusion benefits come to be as a result of STRIs. And I'll turn it over to Diana now. Thank you.
Y bueno, y viene Medellín. Esto es súper preliminar. Como les dije al principio, llegamos apenas este fin de semana de hacer trabajo de campo. Yo estuve allá unas 3 semanas recogiendo información, haciendo una mesa redonda, etcétera. Entonces, esto es súper preliminar, está un poquito desorganizado, les pido mil disculpas. Eso también explica por qué hay tantos errores en las diapositivas, disculpas también por eso, pero bueno, vamos a ver cómo nos va. Entonces, ¿qué hicimos nosotros en Medellín? Estuvimos, bueno, David y nuestra otra compañera, Luis Kempton, que no pudo venir, estuvieron en Medellín en diciembre haciendo una visita piloto, como empezando a hablar con los actores, de pronto mirando si era de interés de la ciudad ser parte de este proyecto de investigación. Empezamos entonces como todo el trabajo de investigación de información secundaria, a identificar actores claves. Logramos hacer más de 30 entrevistas, nos quedan un par pendientes para hacer pues en línea. A quienes entrevistamos, a personas que han trabajado en la transformación de Medellín desde sus inicios, arquitectos o gente que ha trabajado con los gobiernos locales, también con líderes comunitarios, con académicos que tienen una visión un poquito más crítica. Tratamos digamos, de cubrir una gran variedad de personas para que nos den una visión como más panorámica de lo que pasa en la ciudad. Hicimos también una mesa redonda con unas 20 personas participando, donde estuvimos más bien enfocados a pensar cuál es el futuro de la innovación inclusiva en Medellín. ¿Qué queremos después de esta visita? Pues vamos a, pues primero a publicar lo que se llama position paper, un documento académico donde vamos a describir qué pasó en el caso y qué encontramos. También viene un libro después de eso. Si alguien está interesado, después les quedo los datos para pasarlo. Queremos seguir creando más espacios de discusión e intercambio no solamente entre la gente de Medellín, pero la gente de Medellín con Newcastle, con Pittsburgh, con las otras ciudades que vayan viniendo, con Belfast, y pues seguir construyendo redes, ¿cierto? Lo que es muy interesante en Medellín es que desafía de muchas formas la teoría que Michael nos explicó al principio. Muy rápidamente entendimos que la innovación inclusiva, por lo menos desde el punto de vista de la transformación de Medellín, no es una cosa que está como localizada en un distrito geográfico pequeño de unas cuadras, sino que tiene que entenderse en relación al contexto más grande de la ciudad. Y eso es un hallazgo importante y es muy diferente, por lo menos para la teoría. Todos sabemos, Medellín pasa a ser la ciudad más peligrosa del mundo, a la ciudad de la economía digital, a la ciudad de la música, a la ciudad del reggaetón, a la ciudad del coworking, etcétera, y a la ciudad del urbanismo social. Entonces, todo es un proceso de muy largo plazo, es un proceso de transformación que es sistémico, no es solamente el Distrito de Innovación Norte, que ya les voy a explicar, y tiene muchos actores de muchas universidades, de muchos sectores involucrados. Entonces, de nuevo, Medellín se nos sale de esa teoría y nos obliga a pensar muy bien qué es realmente innovación inclusiva y si la podemos determinar como un espacio geográfico o de qué estamos hablando. Cuando nos acercamos primero a Medellín, nos estábamos acercando a Ruta N. Yo no sé si ustedes han escuchado hablar del Distrito Norte o Ruta N en Medellín, que es donde está el Jardín Botánico, el Parque Explora, etcétera. Ese era nuestro punto de entrada. Pero de nuevo nos dimos cuenta que va mucho más allá y ya les voy a contar qué pasó con Ruta N, que no es tan chévere. Está entonces la narrativa del paso a esta ciudad innovadora, esta ciudad de la música, esta ciudad cool, chévere para visitar, la ciudad turística, pero nos encontramos también que hay una doble narrativa en que todo esto es Medellín como un proceso de branding o de marketing de la ciudad, cuando en realidad, o esto pues es la posición de algunos de los entrevistados, las comunidades más marginalizadas continúan en abandono. Entonces está esta doble narrativa que para nosotros todavía no la podemos entender muy bien, pero pues ese será nuestro trabajo. ¿Dónde? Sobre todo en las zonas rurales, en el área metropolitana de Medellín, no se ve dónde empieza y dónde termina, pero está ahí, es como una unidad administrativa diferente y pues lo que conoceríamos mejor como los territorios, digamos en lenguaje de desarrollo acá en Colombia. pero pues hay que admitir y hay que reconocer que hay avances significativos en manera de inclusión. En Medellín se habla mucho de urbanismo social. No sé si lo han escuchado, todos los temas de infraestructura, todos los temas de formalización de los barrios marginales y cómo integrar a estas personas y a estos barrios a las ciudades, ¿cierto? Y ese fue el enfoque que tuvo Medellín por mucho tiempo. La innovación en Medellín tuvo ese enfoque de urbanismo social. Ahora el enfoque es en ciencia, tecnología e innovación. Digamos que está tratando de moverse más hacia la teoría. ¿Y cuál es el riesgo que estamos advirtiendo? Que puede que si se mueven mucho hacia ese lado, se les olvide ese pasado de urbanismo social o de innovación social tan importante que tenían. Yo no sé si ustedes han enterado, antes era el Distrito Norte o el Distrito Ruta N, ahora Medellín como ciudad es un nuevo distrito de ciencia, tecnología e innovación. ¿Cómo empieza? De nuevo, muy rápidamente, pues obviamente hay un rol importante de la crisis y la violencia y esto hace que muchos de los actores de la ciudad, pero sobre todo los empresarios, se unan para decir tenemos que hacer algo pues para que no nos saquen de la ciudad y para poder recuperar la ciudad, como que tocamos fondo, ¿cómo hacemos para sacarla? Y eso ha sido digamos, la narrativa que ha estado como muy coherente entre todos los actores. Pero también hay un contexto económico importante. Es el contexto que en Colombia conocemos como el de apertura económica, pero es básicamente la neoliberalización de nuestra economía que acelera un proceso de desindustrialización de la ciudad, que hace también que se empiecen a perder muchos trabajos. Y hay un tema cultural, nos hablaban de la cultura MacGyver, de esta idea de que la gente soluciona sus problemas, que el país es echado para adelante y que quiere estar, siempre tiene una forma de solucionar y arreglar las cosas. Y eso también se convierte en un tema cultural, una narrativa común muy poderosa entre casi todos. Que también encontramos que fue importante, que hay un trabajo o hubo un trabajo mancomunado de muchos actores. ¿Han escuchado el Comité Universidad Empresa Estado, por ejemplo? Si no, pues vale la pena como revisar. Está mucha empresa privada, empresas grandes, también como EPM, con fama, que no son privadas, pero tienen como esta economía mixta, ¿cierto? Muchas universidades, la alcaldía, comunidades, pero comunidades de pronto no es tan claro cómo ha sido su involucramiento. Como decía, ha habido una narrativa común, tal vez hasta ahora, no sabemos, eso es parte de la discusión que se vendrá ahora en la ciudad. Pero lo que sí podemos ver es que hay un grupo de personas muy comprometidas y con una visión muy optimista del futuro. Si uno pregunta Medellín va para arriba, va creciendo, digamos, es una visión bien optimista, bien chévere. Hasta ahora la innovación social ha sido muy importante. Y se entiende como los sectores culturales, pero también como las comunas, los barrios, cómo la gente ha venido solucionando sus problemas con innovación. En la teoría se conoce como innovación social, innovación frugal, pero es básicamente cómo la gente ha venido resolviendo los problemas que se les va presentando en su día a día, pero eso también implica o es una señal de que siguen las necesidades básicas insatisfechas de mucha parte de la población, siguen sin ser pues, satisfechas, ¿cierto? Ruta N y lo que era inicialmente el Distrito de Innovación de Medellín ha dependido mucho de la alcaldía de Medellín y eso produjo una ruptura que ya les voy a hablar en la última administración. Entonces hoy no es muy claro quién está liderando la innovación inclusiva. Está como en las manos de muchos actores y como de nadie al mismo tiempo. Y sí, también algo que observamos es que la ciudad necesita poner más atención a sus áreas metropolitanas y a la región de Antioquia en general. Está todavía muy centrado en la parte urbana. ¿Qué es esa ruptura? No es palabra de nosotros. Los entrevistados hablaron mucho de esta ruptura del proceso. Entonces había como esta época de oro, ¿cierto? Como estos 20 años de varios alcaldes que tenían como toda esa estrategia y toda esta visión y digamos que había una continuidad del proceso hasta la alcaldía pasada. No es nuestro trabajo, obviamente, hacer observaciones sobre si hubo temas de corrupción o ruptura política, pero sí pasó y pasó eso sumado pues a las consecuencias de la polarización política y la pandemia pues generaron como esa ruptura de lo que era, sigue siendo, ¿no? El Distrito de Innovación Norte, Ruta N, pero Ruta N perdió un montón de ese como papel de liderazgo por su dependencia, claro, de la alcaldía de Medellín. Entonces, lo que es interesante es que, aunque ese espacio geográfico pues todavía existe y todavía sirve de espacio para reuniones y etcétera, Ruta N como institución perdió liderazgo, pero las instituciones y los actores siguieron trabajando juntos de diferentes formas, como venían trabajando antes o creando nuevos espacios. Lo que sí queremos resaltar es que la historia de Medellín está arraigada en una narrativa de recuperación social, de urbanismo social y desarrollo social, y está enfocada en convertirse en un actor global de las economías digitales, de las economías culturales. Mirando hacia el futuro, ¿qué creemos o qué nos contaron sobre Medellín? Es una ciudad dinámica, es una ciudad que está en crecimiento, es una ciudad que tiene, digamos, una historia muy potente de transformación social y de innovación social. Y eso, digamos, queremos que siga siendo parte de la narrativa. Hay algo interesante que pasa en Medellín. Cuando decía Michael al principio, innovación es un tema de mejoramiento, de eficiencia, de pronto generación de ganancia, pero acá estamos viendo que es más bien como un tema de solucionar problemas. El tema de la ganancia, que haya, no sé, profitabilidad o no, viene siendo secundario, por lo menos hasta ahora. De nuevo, vamos a ver qué pasa con la asignación del distrito, ciudad como distrito. Hay cuestiones muy estratégicas que están en discusión. Nos preguntamos hasta qué punto Medellín conservará ese enfoque social, ahora que está más enfocado en ciencia, tecnología e innovación. Hay un gran desafío en torno a la equidad territorial y tenemos dudas sobre si la ciudad va a seguir priorizando esas necesidades sociales sobre otras necesidades económicas. No debe ser pues secreto para nadie cómo la desigualdad se ha venido incrementando en Medellín por temas de los arriendos súper caros, temas de gentrificación, etcétera. Y eso es algo que todavía no le han podido como poner la mano las personas, pues los actores con quienes hablamos. No se sabe, y no es que no sepamos nosotros, es que la gente de Medellín tampoco sabe para qué sirve ser un distrito. Hay una cantidad de plata que se va a recoger a través de impuestos gracias a esa asignación, y hay un acuerdo del consejo que dice más o menos en qué se va a usar, pero ese más o menos es como en todo. Entonces no hay como ni prioridades ni unos enfoques tampoco en ese tema del distrito. Y como decía, pues hay la narrativa está cambiando desde tecnología y pues eso queremos llamar la atención, que eso no quiere decir que se tenga que romper la historia de innovación social y de cambio social. Bueno, pues eso es todo. Yo sé que fue muy rápido y me disculpo si algo no fue claro, pero pues para nosotros tampoco está muy claro todavía, así que sus preguntas van a ser súper importantes. Las escuchamos. Tranquilo.
Yo quisiera saber qué perspectivas recibieron en las empresas de trabajo de campo, puentes entre esta predominancia que ha tenido Ruta N y el desarrollo de Medellín hacia centros de tecnología, innovación, comunicación y temas sociales, pensando en clave de fintech, pensando en clave de poner estas herramientas al uso de temas sociales, pensando en microcréditos, pensando en, sí, como esa convergencia que puede haber entre esto que ya predomina y la necesidad del enfoque social.
Should I translate? Yes. Voy a traducir para que ellos también.
It's like how you can merge the interest of like the status quo of Ruta N and the Medellín ecosystem and like the need to have social investment and give the protagonism to these issues, like putting the technology in service to the social issues.
Yeah.
Thank you very much for the question. I think Medellín has many examples of where innovation has been driven by social need. So if you look at the transport system, the metro, the cable cars, you can interpret those innovations in the urban system as connecting more disadvantaged communities to the centers of activity. So that's one example. Similarly, actually, the Northern Innovation District was almost an urban innovation that was driven by trying to pivot activity away from the richer South and to bring people into the north of the city. I think that more generally, you can look at the decentralization of health and education into local communities as ways of making your innovation, your process of change, very socially driven. So if you use digital innovation to improve access to health for poorer communities, that in itself is a very socially driven process. And I think that, other team members will speak, but I think we were very impressed in a way that perhaps I don't see it as much in Newcastle, at how the public-private partnership was very aware of the social implications of the investments that they make. And what will be interesting is going forward, whether Medellín continues on that path, or whether it becomes more like Newcastle and Pittsburgh in attempting to base its investment priorities on scientific discovery rather than the needs of its communities. Did you want to? I hope that helps. Yeah.
Yeah, and I think that the premise of your question is right on with the whole idea behind the i3o research project, which is how do we manage to incentivize or convince city and regional governments to look beyond a bottom line definition of economic success, and rather to expand out to think about the social dimensions of the policies that are being put in place. Speaking of the Pittsburgh case for a second, here we have a brownfield site. It's a very closed circuit of elite leaders, nonprofit foundations, my own university that's putting $120 million into a single building. They want a return on that investment. And what we are asking and what we are researching is to determine the extent to which the social benefits of those investments can be factored into the indicators of success that are used to think about the rates of return that they're getting from that investment. And I agree with David. The Medellín case has been very encouraging in terms of the openness and optimism with which the Paisa of Antioquia are approaching the prospect of this type of transformation. It feels as though it goes beyond, to some extent, an elite-driven narrative of the same business as usual. But we need to do more work on that to determine that.
I can add a little bit more to the Pittsburgh context. I think that what we see is the potential to incentivize private companies to incorporate inclusion into their metrics, as Michael said, their metrics of success, whatever that might look like, usually profit, return on investment. I think what the University of Pittsburgh has really tried to do that has been successful thus far is the establishment of long-term investments in the communities in which they'd like to see that return on investment, in terms of not only financial returns, but in terms of community buy-in. They have these community engagement centers that rent spaces for upwards of 10 to 20 years. I think they're long-term leases. And I think it makes a statement that says, we're here to stay. And also we want to work with you to help develop your community. And so without that community buy-in, without that assurance from the university, I think that the private corporations and the university and the government, all who have invested so much money into these projects, would have a serious problem. And so that's an incentive in itself. I think when we were speaking to some of the corporations, they spoke a little bit about workforce development, and that was mostly the extent to which they had been challenged on what their inclusion strategy was going to be. So I think there's a lot of room for improvement. I think they've got a good foundation thus far to work from, but we're waiting to see how that plays out. So yeah, thank you for the question.
I'm sure that you can find in Medellín some experiences, especially in services, as health services, because this city have important trajectory, legacy about the health research in the University of Antioquia, etc., for so many years. But in some way, even that Medellín is the most industrialized city in Colombia, it is important to have in mind that the structural condition of Colombian cities and Latin American cities in comparison with Pittsburgh or Newcastle. There is a good paper. I'm going to send this paper of Tobias Frank. Maybe you know that.
Medellín.
Yeah. That demystified the Medellín as the case of innovation in the way that he, from a political economic perspective, institutionalist perspective, to analyze even with some decades of development, still the development process is very unequal. And you have many informality too, and then since the 90s to today, the process of globalization have didn't make the main companies today are non-Colombian. That means that the key anchor for innovation and development is public companies. That means la empresa pública de Medellín. And it's important to have in context this because in terms of economic development, it's very difficult to have new investment and new important developments without the investment of the public companies. It's a key out. Then services may be the most important sector to innovation. And the main companies today of the region are mainly external capital. That means i3o, etc., are now international companies. And usually they have interest in the local development, but it's different when the traditional. I think it's important what you call the ruptura, that the break in the history, because the grupo empresarial antioqueño have changed. They lost the hegemony in the regional development, and that create a new space, well, I don't thinking also about that report for the innovation project in Bogota that we visit La Manzana N in Medellín, because at that moment it was was new in the context of Colombian innovation process.
You want to react to it? Are we good in English? Yeah?
I also skip learners or comments?
No, it's just a simple question, like grade one. I'm wondering what dimensions were you focusing on in terms of measuring the impact of the innovation processes?
I mean, look, that is a critical question, and the whole methodology of i3o of the program is to encourage debate. So the question is not what we believe are the right metrics of inequality. It's to actually ask the question of Medellín, what are your key metrics of inequality? So what are your priorities for social development, and how do you know when you are successful? And the different cities will have different priorities. So I gave very briefly the example of the innovation district in Newcastle, where actually the local acute problem is health inequality amongst older people. It might be in Medellín that the priorities are about younger people and their progression into employment and better employment and homes and things like that. Or it might be, Medellín is remarkable. So Medellín the population has trebled in 50 years. In my city, the population's about the same. It's a city with not much youth. And so the question for i3o is, does Medellín know what its priorities for social development are, and how does it measure? And so it's like that. Yeah.
One of the interesting things to come out of the roundtable that we held last Friday was an activity where we asked people, what are you doing well?
Yeah.
What do you feel are the biggest successes of Medellín? And what are the areas of improvement? And some of the things that were seen as struggles that may form the basis of future indicators for them include gender inequality, children's services, the provision of basic services, the problem of the continuity of social programming across the city footprint, and a continued issue to do with the post-conflict moment and whether that post-conflict moment has actually arrived or whether there's significant conflict still that really needs to be reconciled as the city and the surrounding metropolitan region goes forward. So I think that one of the benefits of acting as an international group of researchers coming into these spaces is that it opens up the prospect for locals, privileged stakeholders, community leaders to be dialoguing. And we received the feedback that, how did you get these people to be talking together around the same table? This hasn't happened. And so that's an encouraging sign that the methodology holds premise to at least perhaps shine a light in these cities in ways that people have been avoiding the question perhaps, or just we provide that different perspective.
Can I ask a question? Are any of you or anyone online from Medellín?
No, but I work for a software company. It's located in Medellín, so I have the question about it because I have all the information that you talk about the culture. But now, in the case of the company, we are really interested, not just about the people that we are working with. So I want to know maybe what can we do or how can we include in our company, I don't know, anything in order to help with the inclusive innovation.
That's the big question.
Yeah.
So you cannot go into a communa, regardless of level, and say, would you like to be a software engineer tomorrow? That is an unrealistic goal. There are decades-long workforce investment pipelines that I would hope to see cities like Medellín pursue in order to maybe just open up the idea in the mind of a 5-year-old that software engineering or something to do with the software industry could be a prospect? Sound engineer for the music required for a computer game, for instance. There's a world of possibilities. So that sort of long-term investment's important. The more short-term thing that can be done is procurement practices. Where does the catering come from? Where do different event spaces get constructed in order to engage in community conversations? Are there spaces for the new sorts of labs that that your company, former company, could use? So there's a lot of different principles that could be used. Some are short-term, but others require that longer-term commitment.
And there is this social responsibility. Does your company engage with local schools?
Yeah.
So, it's that type of thing. Yeah.
Because yes, that is a big goal for us because we work with young people and we know about, like you say, about how is the life there. So we are looking for maybe what is the best tool or the best way to get maybe to treat with that kind of population. Because yes, we are not interested in that. So when you talk about this kind of innovation is I don't know, it's a big challenge, but at the same time it has a big social sense. So in technology or software technology, as in our case, we are really engaging with that. So it's
Thank you very
a good
much.
way to start
That's
thinking.
great.
I know, thank you.
Yeah, exactly to your point. I think a lot of people that we spoke with in Medellín wanted to focus on changing the mindset of the people across the city, across the region, even the more rural areas, that there's already this existing optimism, but that there's potential for growth in terms of what is possible for all of us, what is possible for the next generation, and what skills are we bringing in terms of the next generation of workers. And also to your question before, I think we saw a lot of disparity across actors in terms of what their vision was for problem solving. I know in the Pittsburgh context, the community is going to have a very different view of what is needed versus some of the private corporations, perhaps the university. I think a lot of these actors try to bridge the gap by coming together, but I don't know how often that happens, perhaps without intervention, as Michael said, bringing these people together, having a roundtable, putting them in the same room to talk about these ideas. Otherwise, it becomes sort of an insular conversation and you're not getting the proper representation of voices in those spaces. Both great questions, thanks.
I just want to say to people online, if you have any questions, just write them in the chat.
Have you taken this concept into account to compare it with inclusive innovation?
Yes, and we did raise the question, and it's like a mixed response. Some people thought to be a little bit patronizing, in the sense, or top down as well. So maybe it's not very well received in certain by certain actors. I think they would prefer, especially when you talk with the comunas or the more like social organizations, they would prefer to have more agency, and their agency recognized as agents of innovation as well themselves, rather than using this Ministry of Science vocabulary of social appropriation of knowledge and technology. But it is indeed a part of it. And to connect with your question, if we keep on thinking of innovation of this way of solving a problem, then maybe software companies can become inclusive innovation companies as well, because they will be helping to solve those issues. So it's a similar language, but I think recognizing the agency of local and social actors rather than the top-down ways of approaching it.
Well, two things.
The first one is if it is, I mean, does there exist a contradiction between innovation and tradition? Why am I asking this? Because, I mean, when I hear about innovation, I am thinking about these mega sophisticated cities with public transportation systems, very complex, well, I mean, with a lot of technological developments in their urban and rural areas. But for example, in Latin America, there is this emergence of this idea of recovering this traditional and this ancestral practices in our cities. So how does these two concepts like dialogue between them? I mean, how, for example, can we convince, I am thinking about a doctoral dissertation of one student that is trying to get the idea of these people who make jewelry in a particular place in Colombia, and it is a traditional way of doing jewelry, and the idea of innovation. So she's struggling with this idea of keeping the traditional way of doing this practice and this innovation idea of do this practice in a more competitive way and a way that can be like inserted in a more effective way into the global markets and those kind of things. So I mean, I wonder about that. And the second question is about, I think maybe it's related, but it is about how do we measure the effective results of these innovations? I mean, you mentioned the issue of the public transportation in Medellín, for example, but I was also thinking about for the last 3 years, I have been working with the care system in the city. And one of the things that I was very surprised about is that when we were asking about the amount of information and the quality of the information and the data they have in order to build this care system, when we talked at the beginning, they said we had it all. I mean, we have all the information that you want. We have the information located in the physical space. We have everything that you want. So we were like, okay, we are going to create the best care system in the world. When we went to the data, they didn't have anything. I mean, anything. So it was like, I mean, what happened here? And they said like, okay, you were talking about the information in that way. No, we are thinking about having the information in that way, but we don't have it. So when we ask, okay, how do you take these decisions if you don't have the information? No, we are thinking in the future. I mean, we are doing the prospective way of thinking. So we were like, oh my God, what are you doing? So I am asking about, I mean, how do you measure the medium, I mean, the long-term and the short-term results of these innovations that you were, I mean, promoting or you are studying in those cities? So thank you.
Who wants to lead off on those two excellent questions?
Maybe I can say something about the first part because it's something I'm personally interested in, and we might call it the colonizing knowledge or the colonizing academia or this decolonial movement. It didn't come very clearly in the interviews with the main or like the key actors, but it did come in a way or another with the local leaders. Again, when they're claiming to be recognized as agents of innovation themselves and their neighborhoods and las comunas as part of innovation spaces as well. Then I would like to know how to answer that, but it's a problem of, you see how people, when you go in the cable car, you see how they've been fixing their houses, for example, how they've been built, and you want to recognize that as part of their problem-solving perspective. But also we live in a live mountain range, right? So it's just a matter of waiting when it's the next earthquake coming for those houses to be destroyed. So how to balance that is something I really don't have an answer to. I don't think they either. I think they do advocate for being recognized and be given the tools to innovate and solve the problems rather than having academics and teachers and people going to the communities. This is how you're going to do this and fix it, that they're completely sick of that. So it's an important question to ask. The second was the measurement. I'll pass it to somebody else.
I mean, firstly, I like the tradition question. There are answers. Maybe we chat some of the on the data question. One of the good practice issues that all of you in your careers should insist on when you begin a program is to baseline the information. It is no good to start a program which has a goal or has an objective if you don't know where you're starting from. So it's just a matter of discipline in program design. You know, if you have a goal, if you have an objective, make sure you know where you're starting from. So I don't have a specific answer to the care issue in Medellín, but unless they know where they started from, they will not know what progress they're making.
I love the question, especially the first one, because the conflict between innovation and tradition, you could almost think of that as globalization, localization, and there is a risk that if you go down a pathway of an innovation economy, innovation district approach that follows those global benchmarks that I talked about before, you might eradicate some of the indigenous knowledges and things that make a particular city, whether it's Belfast or Medellín, special. And so I think that's a conversation that needs to be had. I think one of the really exciting things for me is when I hear about participatory action research or community-based participation in some of the innovation initiatives. One example that we heard about coming out of EFIT is the early warning system that is developed and housed at EFIT, but involves communities across the footprint where the innovation is not necessarily the Doppler radar and the modeling that shows when heavy rainfall events will take place. What the innovation is then passing that knowledge quickly through an app and through notifications to local communities who then respond to warn their residents that this is a point where they need to take precautions. And so it's innovation, yes, but innovation both scientific and also that how you activate local knowledge to protect people. And in the 12 years that system has been working, there have been 0 lives lost to flooding, which they could not say 30 years ago. So there's some indigeneity plus global. So there are encouraging signs. How you measure it, I'll go back to David's answer for that one. It's a challenge, but a worthy one.
Muchas gracias.
Sí,
Muy
muchas gracias.
interesante hablar.
Muchas gracias. Esperamos. Sí, ahí están nuestros correos, nos escriben si tienen preguntas o comentarios, si quieren estar más al tanto de la publicación del libro. Va a salir en inglés primero, esperamos que a inicios del otro año y luego lo traduciremos a español a final del otro año. Vamos a ver. Y bueno, y ahí estaremos al tanto.
Now, depending on if you're faculty or student, you can go back to studying for exams, writing papers, or grading things. So thank you so much.
Were there many people on the
15. 15.
Oh, 15.
Cotidiana.
Algo para la